Hello class, and welcome back to another lecture. Today we are diving more so into some more urban legends, as I particularly like telling them all to you, and you always seem oh so interested every single time we talk about them. So gather around our campfire, and today we travel to the distant lands of Iceland for today's story. As today we are speaking about Gryla. Now, for those of you who aren't particularly well versed in Icelandic folklore of all things, you may be wondering who Gryla is. Well, in Iceland, there is this specifically Christmas tale about the 12 Yule lads. Now, these Yule lads can kind of vary in their meaning depending on the story. Sometimes they're just simply mischievous, other times they are dark and twisted. It depends on who's telling the story and depending on exactly which version you're going with. But the one constant, the one thing that always remains the same throughout all of Iceland with this tale is that their mother Gryla is by far the most evil of them all. Now, Gryla is an ogre, or a giantess, some say. She spends most of her time hiding out in the mountains of Iceland. She has cloven hooves, unnaturally long arms, a horribly ugly and disfigured face, and above all, hungers for human flesh, specifically that of children. Don't get me wrong, if you're an adult who gets in her way, or she just happens to be particularly hungry that day, she'll still target you all the same. However, quite morbidly, it seems that the children are her preferred meal of choice. She rarely leaves her mountain cave. The only time she does is during harsh winters and blizzards, where the snow hides her tracks, leaving her untraceable to any normal means. It is said that how she targets her victims is that she waits to see children who are perhaps lost in the snow or were left unattended while playing outside, or other quite sad things of that nature, and she'll drag them away in the blizzard before mysteriously vanishing just as quickly as the blizzard came, with their children never to be seen again. Now, you may be wondering, surely just this one creature could not stand to an entire town, per se, or a good mob of people who happen to catch her in the act and happen to follow her, perhaps track her down, rescue the kids that she's kidnapped before she can do something horrible to them. People have tried. Trust me, for hundreds of years they have tried. But it is always said that whenever such mobs or desperate parents or friends of these kids try to follow her into the storm to try and desperately rescue their friends or their family, or just simply to be a good Samaritan, that the mobs also vanish with the storm, just as she does every time. Now, with all this being said, you can definitely see why she's been feared for hundreds of years now in Iceland at this point. However, despite her infamy, and despite how widely known her name is across Iceland, no one seems to be able to definitively say how she came into being. There are theories, of course. In fact, there are two main ones that seem to be the most often told. There's one that says that, just like any of us, she was once human. But during a particularly hard winter, her and her husband and her kids were running out of supplies, they were running out of food, they were running out of firewood, they were running out of drinking water to use, running lower and lower on resources until one day, in an act of pure, dark desperation, her and her husband ate their own children in order to survive. And survive they did. But what they became was not human. And they say that this dark act of cannibalism is what gave her her dark powers and what disfigured her so, as her and her husband committed an act so vile, so unthinkable, even in terms of desperation of a harsh winter, that it was simply a crime that could not go unpunished by nature. Now, the other story as to how she came into being is quite interesting. There's a version where Gryla was actually God's first attempt at making humanity. Obviously, with her disfigurements, her appearance, and such, she was deemed a failure. However, God couldn't quite end his creation, despite how obviously horrible she was, not only physically appearance-wise, but with her tendencies, to say the least. Despite all of that, he could not kill his creation, and so he simply exiled her to Iceland, which is why she currently resides there. Another thing that is so absolutely terrifying about her is that she doesn't even need to necessarily eat you to kill you. It is said that simply gazing upon her is enough to kill you. Now, with all this being said, you can understand that perhaps these tales were considered to be a bit dark, and they are, and especially for the time of when they were first coming out, hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And so graphic were these stories, and so traumatized did it occasionally leave children, that in 1746, stories of her became illegal to tell across all of Iceland. Now, this obviously didn't kill off the legend of her. Instead, it simply adapted the story a little. Stories became a bit more whimsical about her and the Yule lads, and the story started to focus a bit more on the Yule lads themselves, whereas, oh yes, these Yule lads are whimsical and nice, oh, but watch out for that Gryla. It slowly shifted away from dark, depressing cannibalism of telling your children not to go out on their own, to simply talking about, oh, those 12 scampish little Yule people. But, as with most things, time moves on, and now some of the grimmer stories have started to circulate and become far more popular again. So, if you happen to live in Iceland, or if throughout these holiday seasons your many travels happen to bring you there during this time of year, don't wander off into the storms by yourself, for you never know what is lurking deep within them. But, as I say, until next time.